We are back with another episode of the Brothers-in-Law podcast. We are joined here. I got my man Conrad, my co-host.
Hello, hello.
Thank you for going on the journey with me, man. And we
Thank you for
down to
having me.
episode 9, I think.
Episode 9.
But we really moving. And we are joined today by a very special someone. We have Janae here. Janae, thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
for
being
having
here.
me.
Just so nice to see you again, to have worked with
Definitely.
alongside with you for the past 6 years, and for the people to learn a little bit more about your experiences and just get some advice from you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, y'all.
Of
Of
course.
course.
For those who are tuning in for the first time here at the Brothers-in-Law podcast, our goal is just to provide information to people who may not know it, and we don't want people to wait till they get arrested before they're now having to navigate and figure out what their rights are and what their powers are. So hopefully today people will be a little bit more empowered and a little bit more knowledgeable about their rights and what happens if they get arrested. So we've actually had a few episodes where we talked about what's called collateral consequences. And if you have not seen those episodes, Conrad, can you break down in general what collateral consequences are as it pertains to an arrest?
Yeah, so collateral consequences are things other than the arrest that can happen to you when you're arrested that are also detrimental to you and to your life.
Right. So what we had so far, we had Babatunde come through and talk about the civil collateral consequences, meaning, how your job can be affected, how your housing can be affected. We had another former friend of not former another friend of ours, Jorge, come through and talk about the immigration collateral consequences, how people can get either deported or just the other ways that your life can be affected immigration wise. And then today, we're going to talk about the family collateral consequences. And that's why we have Janae here as our resident expert of all things family court, all things ACS. And that's what we're going to dive into today.
All right, I'm ready.
Also, as I mentioned earlier, hair is laid, and I want to make
Thank
sure
you,
I
thank
call
you.
it out. Yeah. All right. So before we even get into FDP and family court, can you tell us what made you want to be a public defender, and why did you choose to work in the family realm of things?
So I think they're kind of one and the same for me. I grew up in the Bronx, right? I grew up in a neighborhood that was low income, and so didn't personally have a lot of interaction with ACS, right? I was privileged enough that that's not something my family experienced, but I can say tons of my neighbors, folks in my community, were constantly dealing with the police, right, with immigration consequences, and predominantly with ACS. And I think that that's something that's really common, right? Whether it's ACS or some other branch of that, right, in another state, right, or city, right, child protection,
Right.
wherever you live at, is really common, right, for Black and brown folks who experience poverty, right, or are lower of a lower socioeconomic status.
Right.
And the more that you're entrenched in these systems, right, whether that be the shelter system, receiving public benefits, arrested, any of these things, right, these collateral consequences that you've been talking about in these government agencies that folks are interacting with, it's more and more likely that you're going to end up having ACS contact. And so I think experiencing and seeing a lot of that firsthand growing up is something that definitely made me say, okay, this is the type of work that I want to do generally, right? I know I want to be a public defender. I know I want to give back to the community I grew up in, right? Hence where we all work. But specifically with ACS, I had a neighbor, right? And I want to say I was maybe like end of middle school, early high school.
Gotcha.
And she actually had her son taken from her. And I remember I was probably like 14,
Yeah.
taking out my garbage like in the middle of the night and literally seeing the cops and an ACS worker at her door doing body checks, snatching her kid out the bed, right? And like, this was not a kid that I was super close to. We were a little bit far off in age from each other.
Right.
But like that experience of watching a kid get snatched from their parent and their parent not being able to do anything about it was, I think, traumatic just as a bystander, right? And so I think that's really what drove me to want to do this specific type of work of family defense.
Right. Wow.
That's
All right.
powerful.
And even before we even dive into family defense, I know most people, I think the shelf life of a public defender is what, 2-3 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So how have you been able to sustain yourself 6 years now?
Yeah.
Well, what would you say has been the key that's been allowed you to continue this fight for the past 6 years?
That's a hard one because honestly, there are days where I get up and I'm super excited to do this work and I really feel like reinvigorated and like passionate, right? Like I'm ready to go into court and fight. And there are other days where I'm like, truly, I'm over this shit.
Right.
I'm tired. I don't have nothing left to give. I feel like
I'm putting my notice in today.
Exactly. Like I've typed it up 12 times. It's ready to go, right? You know, you just feel like you're arguing a lot of times and you're not really making that dent. But I think reimagining what a win is, right? And I think that's something that was taught very early on to me by like my mentors who are public defenders, right? And something that I try to teach the folks that I'm supervising now, right? Like a win is not just saying I won a trial, right? Or I won a hearing. A win could be my client got more visitation time with their kids. They got to have a visit for the holidays, right? They got to open Christmas presents together. They got to celebrate a birthday, right? I kept a parent from, you know, having their rights terminated to their child, right? Maybe their kid's still not with them, but like they still have a possibility of reunification. So really redefining what a win is and enjoying those small wins, right? Having a client say, you know what, we didn't win the trial, but I felt like you really gave it your all. And like, I had an opportunity for my voice to be heard, to say what I needed to say to the judge. And like, I feel like I accomplished something, right? I felt like my story was told and like, not for nothing, like this judge has better insight to who I am as a parent. And so like those small things give you the extra umph to get up in the morning and say, right, I want to do this for one more day. I want to push again, right? And I think too, like now that I'm in a position where I'm supervising, like the teaching aspect of it is great. The mentorship is great. And like really being able to see the growth of more junior attorneys and like them hitting those milestones and coming up with the creative arguments and like thinking about things that maybe I never even thought of, right? And seeing that growth in them makes me excited to be like, okay, I need to push a little bit harder. And to set a good example, how can I be more creative in my arguments, right? Because they're watching that.
You know, you've mentioned it a few times. Supervising attorney. I don't think I gave you the right introduction. All right, so Janae here is a supervising attorney in the family defense practice, okay? And we really go back. We were cube mates. So when we first all got hired, same class 6 years ago, our office was like an open floor plan in cubes. We were right next to each other.
And may I say, this man keeps an impeccable cube. It was probably the cleanest one.
Thank you. I take pride. And to this day, I am very, very, very clean in particular, and I take pride in that. But yeah, we were cube mates. I used to refer to you, actually. So like we work in a team where like we have a criminal lawyer, we have a family lawyer, we have an immigration lawyer. We were part of the same team for a little while.
I feel like I learned a lot of the stuff I know about criminal law from the two of y'all. Wow. Conrad's second year sat right in front of me.
Right. That's true.
And now here we are.
Annoying her every day.
Yep. Coming in late.
And here we are 6 years. I want to just take a minute to, number one, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I feel honored.
For real. And just also, whenever I started this podcast, I didn't really think about just how phenomenal, you know, my network is. And I was thinking, okay, is it going to be hard to get people to pull up here? Do I know enough lawyers? And I thought, wait, I know many lawyers, and the lawyers who I know are phenomenal attorneys. And it just makes me feel real blessed to work alongside you. Have done so for the past 6 years. And now people get to just meet you and also get a glimpse into you know, what you do. And really thankful for you being here.
Thank you. And ditto to y'all. Like, thank you for creating this space. I feel like it was definitely something that was needed, right? And that a lot of folks don't have access to this information, right? Or, you know, they're doing the Google deep dives, but not really understanding what's accurate information, right? Not being able to say, like, I don't have the money to go in and have, you know, a consult with the lawyer. And certainly, like, while we're not offering legal advice here, I definitely think just having a basic understanding before you encounter this scenario, right? And it's, you know, a little too late and you're caught up is so valuable.
Yeah, just having access to this information can do so much more help for people.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get into it. Family defense.
Yes.
I don't even know how to start this. So start this way. What do you do as a public defender that works in family defense? What does that job entail?
Ooh, that's loaded. I mean, we work with an amazing team. We have parent advocates. We have social workers. But I think any public defender can tell you that, like, your job is not just litigating a case, right? It's really, truly understanding as much as you can about your client, about their family, to be able to make those creative arguments and have a judge see them as a person. But long story short, in the same way that if you had a criminal attorney, right, defending you in criminal court, I'm doing the same thing in family court. And so when folks either are accused of neglecting or abusing their children by child protection in New York, that's ACS, or potentially even have their children removed from their care by the state, right? We're going in and we're defending them, and we're saying that these folks deserve to have their children back in their care if they want them, in order to create some other scenario, right, or family arrangement that works best for them.
Got you.
And so, you know, our episode is about collateral consequences today, and obviously we're here to talk about the collateral consequences that involve family practice, right? So let's just set up a hypothetical. Let's say we're at home with two parents, they're fighting, kids at home, and one parent calls the cops on the other parent and accuses the other parent of hitting them, and the police come and arrest the parent. What are the consequences of that? What could happen?
Ooh, okay, so this is actually a really common scenario that I would say is at least 40 to 50% of my cases right now. If it's not that, it's usually like substance use. But in this particular scenario that you posed, the police are likely going to come, right? They're going to have an investigation, which we all know is really not an investigation, right? It's not like a Law and Order episode where they're really getting to the bottom of it. They're having a quick conversation, and ACS is going to be usually right into with them. If not, the cops are going back to the precinct and they're calling ACS, right? And they're saying, hey, this incident went down, right? There was some sort of an argument, altercation, maybe physical, maybe not, but there was a kid present, right? Because cops are mandated reporters, so they're required to snitch on you. And when that happens, right, an ACS worker is going to come out, likely to your home. They're going to interview you. They're going to likely interview your partner who you had this disagreement with. They're going to talk to your kids, right? They're going to do body searches of your children, which is extremely invasive, right? So a lot of times they are strip searching these kids, right? They're looking for marks. They're looking for bruises. They're taking photos. They're interviewing the kids, right? And asking them, hey, like, did you see your parents or whoever's like had this altercation, right? Like, did you see the argument? Did you hear anything?
Right.
How often do they argue? What type of things do they say to each other?
Right.
They're also asking the kids, like, do your parents use drugs? Do they use alcohol? Have you seen them have like strange behavior that might be indicative of mental health, right? Like concerns. Have your parents ever hit you, right? They're examining folks' houses, right? They're looking to see if the home is dirty. And by that, I don't mean like a pile of laundry, right? But like, are there rats? Are there roaches? Is there heat in the apartment, right? Is there running water, right? Do you have leaks? Is there stuff all over the place, right? Are there things piled up? They're looking in your cabinets. They're looking in your fridge. Do you have, enough food, right? And all of those things can turn into a case. And so even if you ultimately don't end up with a case for this argument, right? Maybe it was just a verbal disagreement. Everybody's fine.
Right.
You could pick up a case for anything else they happen to find.
Wow.
Right?
Unrelated to the
what they actually came there for, right? So I've had many folks who've come in and have been like, yeah, ACS came because we had a verbal disagreement and they didn't find anything. But then they started poking around and they were like, oh, well, we noticed that your kid missed school, right? Or, your child mentioned that like dad like sniffs weird white stuff, right? Or like dad likes to drink lots of beers, and like now you having a case, for neglect, right? Because ACS thinks you're an alcoholic, or they say, yeah, sometimes my dad hits me, right? Sometimes my mom hits me. Okay, well, when they hit you, does it hurt? How often have they hit you? Have you ever had a bruise, right? Now you got another case for that, right? So it could be literally any little thing, and oftentimes when this happens, you get hauled into court, right? Sometimes they're going to interview the parents too. And oftentimes I will say the notes that they're taking are not the most accurate. They're not transcribing what you're saying. So there's going to be lots of holes in there. It's not like when you talk to the police and you make an admission, they ask you to sign a sworn statement, right? These workers are just taking down notes, and those are going to come in as admissions in court, but you've never actually reviewed those statements, right? So you can't be like, oh, hey, you got this piece wrong.
Right.
But it's still coming in, right? Against you, which sucks. So FYI, if you didn't know this before, talking to an ACS worker is like talking to a cop. Every single thing you say against, say to them is going to be used against you in court and going to be used to snatch your child. And even if they didn't have enough to take your kid when they first started the investigation, if they find something, they're going to take them then.
Which is something that we experience often, and what we also always tell our clients. If we meet a client at arraignments and ACS could be and would be maybe at their door the next day. And like what we always tell everybody is like, just don't speak to ACS until you've spoken to your lawyer or until you have a family court lawyer with you.
And a lot of times, they have these really loose allegations, right? They might have some kind of a statement from a kid, but they don't have enough to corroborate that statement, right? Or like they have loose allegations from a police officer who actually didn't witness anything. And if they can't get your partner in court to come testify against you, right? Or they don't have photos of somebody with like a black eye, they're not going to have enough to actually make out their case, right? You probably could get a more favorable settlement or even get your case dismissed. But oftentimes folks feel so inclined, and I think as any human being would, to defend themselves. And so they start saying, well, no, you actually got the story wrong. Let me tell you what happened. And then it's like,
she hit me first. I just like pushed her to get off of me.
Exactly. And then you inadvertently have like kind of snitched on yourself, and ACES is going to run with that and make a whole case out of it. It happens time and time again.
Wow. So let's say like that scenario happens and the criminal court case gets dismissed. Does that mean the family court case automatically gets dismissed? Or
Absolutely not.
So what happens typically with the family case when the criminal court case gets dismissed?
So I mean, on most of the cases I've had, I mean, many of them have been with the both of y'all. Clients will have their criminal court case dismissed, right? There's not enough evidence. They couldn't meet the speedy trial requirements. Family court does not work like that. They don't care. I can say on average, most of my clients are in court at least a year.
Wow.
Even if their criminal case goes away. Even if they don't have orders of protection in criminal court anymore, has nothing to do with family court.
And what's crazy is most of our cases that involve like some family court connection is over within 90 days.
Right. So your criminal case can be over like this, right? Super quick. Orders of protection are done. You can go right back to your life as you knew it before. Family court does not work like that. They don't care about what you have to do, where you have to be, how this is affecting you, whether it's causing you to be homeless and sleeping in your car, right? Whether you haven't had real meaningful contact with your kid and I don't know how long. That's not their priority, right? So like on a good day, if my client does all the programming super early on in their case, and a lot of these programs, like for example, for a domestic violence like course, some sort of batterer's intervention, those classes are 26 weeks. Oftentimes twice a week. And then there's usually another parenting class that follows that, right? So like if you're starting off early, you're maybe finishing all your core classes, you're probably getting, some sort of dismissal on your case, like, or like some kind of other kind of favorable settlement, maybe 8 months to a year. But if you're taking your case to trial, right? If you've done those services later on, right? If it's a more serious case, like it's sex abuse or anything like that, year plus easy. Like I've had cases that have literally been open since 2 weeks after I started at our job.
Wow.
And they're still open.
That's wild.
And that's not uncommon in our practice. That's why I say like we get to know our clients on a completely different level. I have so many clients where I've like literally seen their kids grow up. My clients have had, subsequent children while their cases were open. Like I've been invited to birthday parties and like all of the things, like where we have parent advocates who are there when they give birth, trying to prevent them from taking those kids. Because that's another thing. Like you want to talk about collateral consequences, right? And I know that's, I'm an avid listener. So like, I know that's been like a theme here, right? Like you have a child while you have an open case. If you haven't resolved a lot of the issues, you're not pretty much done with that programming. That can be like a basis for them to snatch any kids you have after the fact when you have an open case. And like, I've had clients who have been like, my case is closed. I went and gave birth. They figured out that I had children before this child that I'm giving birth to, and that the hospital staff or the social worker has asked me, well, does that child live with you? Are they in your care? And they figure out that I've had an ACS case, or they look in that file and they figured out that ACS has been called in the past. And then guess what? They call ACS again and go, hey, we have somebody here who has a child in care.
New child?
Yep. And they take that new baby.
Wow.
Doesn't mean you've done anything quote unquote wrong. Again, there's no new allegation.
So that's crazy. That's gonna be my next question to you. Like, I think most people who are like pro ACS may have the idea that like ACS doesn't get involved unless there's actually some harm being done to a child. So when it happens, there needs to be some kind of intervention, and ACS is the one who does it.
Nope.
What do you say to that?
Yeah.
Not been my experience. I mean, of course, right? Like the average person is gonna be like, you know, no one wants to see a child like being harmed or abused in any way. I think like most humans would say that, right? But that hasn't been my experience in doing this job. Like, yeah, I've had a handful of cases where my clients have admitted, you know, like to the allegations and where they've been things that have been a little, you know, on the serious side, right? But for the most part, like, not for nothing, these are crimes of poverty, right? Like a dirty home. If you really wanted to help this person, you would bring in like cleaning services, right? You would help them connect with the landlord to have them do necessary repairs. And like, you can get all those things court ordered after the fact. ACS is involved, right? You can ask the judge to order them to do that. But like, you don't need to take someone's child.
Right.
Because you're like, your house is in dirty condition, right? Like, if it's that deplorable where they can't live there, okay, perhaps you assist them with a shelter, perhaps you assist them with a deep clean, right? But like, it's nonsense like that people are getting their kids taken away from. They're getting their kids taken away for like substance abuse, right? This person could go to an outpatient program. You could make a family arrangement, right? Snatching their child from them is not going to help them in their road to recovery, and it's certainly not going to necessarily make it happen any faster. I mean, back in the day, it's not really as much of a thing anymore. Now that like the laws have changed, like I've had clients who've had their kids removed for weed.
Jeez.
Wow.
Right? Like, that seems egregious to the average person when like now you can literally walk on the street and smoke. But like couple years ago when we first started, like that was a thing. It's not happening as much now, but it was, right? Educational neglect cases, right? Not, and a lot of times my clients are like, yeah, well, I live in a shelter and my shelter is in Queens and my kid's school is in Staten Island or whatever, right? And like I have 3 different kids at 3 different schools. I can't get them all there at the same time, and we don't have busing, right? And so like, instead of assisting with those things, right, and really asking why this family is experiencing what they're experiencing, they snatch kids and then they ask questions later.
Y'all, it's not a joke what you were saying. Yes, you can get arrested if your house is deemed to be too dirty in the eyes of the criminal legal system. And like Janae said, it could lead to you losing your children because of this.
And then it's you know, and like I know we've talked about this, right? But like you lose your kids, right? Your public assistance benefits change, right? So like that makes it harder to feed yourself, right? You have a domestic violence situation and you were in a family shelter, you get kicked out that shelter. And even if y'all reunite, it's often really difficult to get back into a family shelter again, right? So like, how do y'all really reunify as a family? A lot of times folks have had to been like, well, we can't be in the same shelter anymore. We're going to get flagged. So you take some of the kids, I take some of the kids, and we'll go to 2 different family shelters. Right? Like, that is not okay.
Have you ever seen a circumstance where like someone called the police because they wanted help, and then the police come, they get arrested
all the time,
and then ACS comes and also takes the kid? All the time. And they're the ones who called the police in the beginning?
All the time. I can think of one case in particular that I had, I think it was maybe my 2nd year. I had a male client and he called the cops, right? Alleging that the mother of his children like had assaulted him. And I saw the photos, right? He had, his whole face was scratched up, broken nose, like bloodied all over the place. And he got arrested. They took the kid from him, gave her the child, and we litigated his case for a 1.5 years. And then eventually ACS dug a little bit more. They filed allegations against her, right? And so now they had cross DV cases.
They didn't drop it against him?
But they did not drop the case against him. I had to litigate his case. Like we went all the way to trial, and the judge ultimately ended up dismissing his case, saying that they didn't have enough, right? And he testified against her, and we put all the photos in, right? But like, it's so common, especially with dads. Like a lot of these workers come in, right? Folks have their own, and this is anybody, like you have your own implicit biases, right? You have your own experiences. You can say like, well, the typical case I see, this is what it looks like, right? And so a lot of times they jump to conclusions. And like I said, it's not what you see on TV. Like you don't have Olivia Benson running all over the city, right? Like asking questions and like doing this thorough investigation. Like caseworkers are an arm of a prosecutorial body. They are not there 99% of the time. I mean, I've seen a few that have been okay.
Right.
But they're not there to like assist you and like really solve problems. They're there to look for something to prove the allegation they have in front of them,
Right.
and then 9 times out of 10 to file a case against you.
Right.
I got a question.
Oof.
Corporal punishment.
Yeah. That's a big one.
It's a big one. Can corporal punishment lead to you losing your child? And what, like,
Yes.
what would it take? What does it look like?
So they call it excessive corporal punishment. In theory, right, it's totally fine to discipline your child. You can hit their hand or pop them on the butt, and like that should be fine, right? But excessive corporal punishment should be something like your child has marks, your child has bruises. They're saying they're in like some sort of severe emotional or mental distress as a result of being hit. It's happening repeatedly, right? They're scared of their parent. And most of the time, like, yes, you do see cases where there's marks, there's bruises, right? A kid has been hit with an object of some sort, right? Or but we're not necessarily talking about like broken bones or anything. I'm talking about like your parent hit you with a belt and you have a mark on your behind, right? And I'm not saying that, you know, for whatever it's worth, like that is the best, you know,
parenting behavior,
right? But like also far be it of me to judge. Like I don't know what's going on in that house, what behavior a child's engaging in, right? And like what other methods you've tried that like haven't worked, right? I've had plenty of parents say to me, yeah, I normally don't hit my kid. I put him on timeout. I take something away, but like I did that 10 times and like it didn't work. And now my kid is stealing and they're doing all these other things. And as someone who has experienced the system, I'm worried that my kid's going to end up locked up. So I'd rather hit them to teach them a lesson, right? Than getting a phone call that my kid is dead somewhere or they're in jail, right? And I hate to take it to extremes, but like this is a lot of times what folks are experiencing, and you truly never know what's going to be the thing that like tips the scale, right? Like a lot of times I've even seen, especially with older kids, like with teenagers, they kind of flex on their parent, and the parent's like, oh, okay, like you about that life, let's do it, right? You want to boss up and hit me, right? Or try to punch me in my face at 16, 17?
I wish my son would square with me when he's
right, exactly. Like I'm not gonna just sit here and like take the hit. I'm gonna hit you back, or I'm gonna push you off, right? And like that could be excessive corporal punishment,
right?
You know, like so it.
Or God forbid he like hits his mother.
Right, exactly. And it's happened. I've had every single one of these scenarios we're talking about, and I've had them more than once, right? So I can't say that there's like there's what the statute says, right? But I can't say there's like that clear cutoff of this is just corporal punishment and this is excessive corporal punishment, right? Like I've had a case because like culturally, like it can be a thing to make your kids like meal on rice, right? But like to ACS, that might be excessive, right? They might file a case against you for that. And unfortunately, there is not enough diversity on the bench, despite it being the Bronx, which is super diverse, right? Which is predominantly Black and brown folks. The bench does not reflect that. Right. It just doesn't, right? And a lot of times the attorneys in the courtrooms don't reflect that, right? The prosecution doesn't reflect that. And they also don't reflect folks who grew up in poverty, right? And so they truly don't have an understanding of the folks that they are the arbiters for, right? Like of their life experiences and what they're dealing with on a regular basis. And so like judge will just say, well, like just go to a parenting class. And I'm like, okay, judge, I get where you're coming from, right? Like in your head, you have to create a scenario where you can feel rest assured that if I send this kid home, we're not going to be in this scenario again. But like not for nothing, my client is working 2 jobs. They just got kicked out of their house, right? So they have no place to stay. You know, they might even lose their job because that's another collateral consequence. When you get an ACS case, you can lose your job. They don't have money for this, right? How are they going to get there? Like having to ask ACS to like in a court order to be required to pay for MetroCard so that clients can get to programming, right? Like, or someone's like, yeah, I'll do the class, but the class is offered in the middle of the day. Like, I have a job. You want me to quit work so that I can do this and then visit with my kid? Like, of course I want to see my child, but like, also, I now have to keep a roof over my head and I can't be home with my family. So in New York City, I got to pay for a second place to live. Who can do that?
Or the job fired you because you had an open case.
Exactly.
Like some of these things are just so intertwined.
Yeah.
So we talked about like how you can be a taxi driver with Babatunde and you get arrested and you lose your job. And we also talked about orders of protection. So like the way you just said, you get kids, like someone might be out of their house and now they're unstable. But the way it works is like you get arrested for whatever you get arrested for, and you get an order of protection that says you got to stay away from this person's home, school, whatever.
Right.
So now you can't go home whatsoever. And then like you're saying, oh, just do a parenting class, but like I can't.
Your whole life is destabilized.
I
right?
don't have a home right now. I don't have a job right now. Or if I do have a job, I'm doing my job all the time. It just, they really don't understand.
Right, and it's just like, you know, we can get the classes for free on folks' insurance, right? We can have ACS pay for the classes like via court order. And I think that that's like one of the few good things I can say about New York, because I just went to a conference for parent defense, and like that's not a thing in other parts of the country, right? No. So like in that, I don't want to say we're privileged in that sense, because it's ridiculous that folks have to do these things anyways, right? But like at least it's not something where necessarily has to come out of their pocket, right? At the same time, though, there aren't a plethora of classes, right? And certainly not ones that like the court goes, yeah, I'm actually going to approve that class, or the ACS is going to say we're going to approve that class. We think it meets all the criteria. It teaches the stuff we want it to teach, right? And so folks are oftentimes like, yeah, like I would do a class that's at 6 o'clock at night, but like there isn't one. The class is only available 12 to 2 on like Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's the middle of the day. I got a job. Like, what do you want me to do? Right. And so like, can you afford to take, even with our job, right? And we're salary, can you afford to say, hey, to your boss, I need to be out 2 times a week for 2 hours plus the commute time.
Right.
Not all, I mean, COVID has helped, but like not all of these services are virtual. Right. Oftentimes they're in a different borough. The wait lists are super long. So it's like, okay, even if I can find that class, you might not be able to get into it for 3 months.
Right.
That's not helping you if you're trying to get a settlement pre-trial, right? It's all these things. Or like, I would do them after work. I found a class after work, but it's the same days I'm supposed to visit my kid.
Wow.
What do you do?
Yeah, it's like that. I mean, a lot of stuff, like I'm seeing it right now with the case that I have. Like I had a client who has a teenage daughter who's wilding out. Like she's out there whatever time at night she wants to be, hanging out with whoever she wants to hang out with, doing whatever she wants to do. And my client, the mom, was like, no, like you can't do this. Like I want to put you on the right path. And so she was trying to like set rules for her. Come home at this certain time. Like don't be with these people. And this client lives in a shelter, a family shelter, right? So she has this house because she lives with her daughter. And so one day the daughter comes home late and the mom is like yelling at her, like, what are you doing? And then the daughter beats her up and calls the cops on my client, and my client catches a case because of it. And so now there's an order of protection saying you can't be around or be with your daughter, right? And because
at a house that you pay for.
Right. And because she can't be with her daughter, she's now losing the shelter.
Exactly.
Right? Like this is
and
crazy.
Who wants to go to a single person shelter? Like, is it great that folks have, options, right, that don't require them to sleep on the street? Like, yes. But at the same time, like, anybody who has ever experienced a single person shelter can tell you it is not a spectacular place to be in. Like, I've had many a client who's like, I'm going to couch surf. I'm going to sleep in my car. I'm going to ride the train overnight, right? Because they don't want to go to a single person shelter. They're like, it's rough out here. I'm not trying to do that.
Right.
And like that shouldn't be the only option. And it might take them 6, 8 plus months to get back home. Like I've had cases where on day 1 at arraignment, their partner is like, I don't want to move forward with these charges. I want this person back home yesterday. ACS is blowing all the things out of proportion. It's a misunderstanding. The kid is saying, I want them back in the home. And the judge is still like, nah, not going to happen.
Wow. Paternalism at its best.
That's crazy, bro. I think one of the other crazy things is like being at arraignments and interviewing a client, talking to them like, hey, like you ask them about their family situation. It's like, oh yeah, kids living at home with me and the parent. And then you go up on the record and the prosecutor is like, oh, ACS has already removed the kid from the home. And that's the first time that the parent learns that ACS has removed the kid. That's
and
crazy.
Like there's so many cases I've had where like you don't get as much time as you like often, right, to interview your client, to have those like really thoughtful and thorough conversations, they oftentimes have to happen in a meeting after you're arraigning the case, right? Picking another day because you're running back and forth all over the place, right? But also just because like the cases, you might get the allegations, right? Like the charging document, and then be like, you're on the record in 15 minutes. Long story short, though, there's so many times I can't really move forward and get the things I need to get in order to arraign a case and like make the best argument, because I'm spending the time. And like, I'm so grateful that we have parent advocates. That's also not a thing that a lot of offices offer, right? But people don't even know where their kids are. Like, they get snatched and they're like, yo, I've been in a holding cell. I have no idea where my kids are.
For the
like,
past 24, 48 hours.
the cops came, they took them. I don't know where my child is. I don't know if they're safe. I haven't talked to them. I don't know if they're with family. My kid is 6 months old.
My God.
Right? My child has special needs. They're nonverbal.
Right.
I don't know what's going on. Right? I got out of hold, like I got out of jail. I went to arraignments. I did all the things, right? I'm literally walking up the street to family court to now do arraignments for that case, right? And it's like, okay, well, like I called on my family. Nobody knows where my kid is. No one's heard anything from ACS, right? My family's calling all over the place. We're trying to figure out who the caseworker is. Can they be placed with grandma? Can they be placed with the cousin? You have no idea where your child is. They might be in a holding center downtown.
Crazy.
Speaking of arraignments, let me tell you this story that I heard this past week. This is from one of my supervisees. It really blew my mind. So my supervisee was in arraignments and picked up a woman client who her baby father called the cops on her for like a situation. Cops come, don't arrest him, arrest her, and now she's at arraignments. And this attorney is arguing with the prosecutor to figure out whether our client should go home or not. They're arguing over the order of protection. And our office is arguing that it should be limited. She should be able to go back home, parent her child, and give all the arguments out there. The DA is like, no, it should be full. I don't want your client to go home, and your client should have to find somewhere else to stay. Case is over, right? Judge rules, full order protection, come back in a week, and I'll rehear you again. When the case is over, the DA hands my supervisee a note, who is the lawyer of this woman, and he says, I'm not supposed to give this to you, but here it is. And the note says, we actually think your client's the victim here.
I've had at least 3 cases like that
we
recently.
actually your client's the victim here, and I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I'm gonna give it to you anyways. And after the case had already been called, so like this lawyer just advocated for my client to be homeless, just advocated
which
against
is hella
my client.
unethical.
You know what I'm saying? And then hands this letter, and it just blows my mind how that the prosecutorial system, the government system, is just that. I don't know what the word is. It's just that pervasive to where it really even invades a prosecutor from stopping. And prosecutors decide, they say that I'm doing this role because of my discretion, I have all this power, and then actively decide not to use that discretion in that moment. That really blew my mind.
I mean, I've had clients deported because of things like this, right? Like another collateral consequence, right? I don't know how much this was gone into, right? But like just about everything in immigration court is discretionary, right? And so like you get orders of protection in family court, and they say things like there's a domestic violence case and that's the basis, or there's excessive corporal punishment and that's the basis. That could be grounds for deportation, right? That could be a situation where like if you have an affirmative application out there, you're trying to get citizenship, well, you're screwed,
I don't think
right? And like we have creative like language that we use that hints to judges like this is what's going on in the background without actually placing that on the record, because we don't want a transcript that a client is undocumented, right? And like you have some judges that are, you know, at least willing to say, okay, well, I'll issue it as a regular order so that it doesn't pop up like in an ICE search. But our judges are like, nope, this is quote unquote serious. I'm like, it's so serious, but you actually haven't gone to trial. You haven't heard any evidence. All you have is allegations. I could allege right now that the sky is purple. That doesn't mean it's true, right? And you're setting somebody up to be deported. Like, do you know what that does to that family? That person might be the breadwinner, right? In that household, right? Like they might be the main English speaker in that household, right? Like, so all of your actions are also affecting this child that you're
was just
trying
gonna
to
say that.
quote unquote protect.
I was
Right.
just gonna say that. Like, do judges ever stop to consider that just up and changing this child's life like that is something that affects a child
I mean,
negatively?
it's literally part of the law, right? It's one of the things that they're supposed to consider when they're taking a child away. Like, even if there is harm, right, or like impending harm, right? Is this a situation where like we can put orders or other things in place, programming that can keep this child with this parent or other family member and safe, right?
Right.
But a lot of times they're going to say, well, if your client's testimony wasn't super convincing, right? Or like, I still have concerns. I want to see them in the program first. And so I don't think that right now it's in this child's best interest to be with their parent, even understanding all of the things that are happening in the background, right? Knowing
Right.
that this might mean this kid is with a stranger in foster care, right?
Right.
It might mean that they oftentimes try not to, but like they could be separated from their siblings, right? And like, especially for kids who are like, it's a special needs child, right? It's a really young kid. It's a mom who's breastfeeding, right? Like, that's even more traumatic. Like, can you imagine sitting there saying, like, I have this brand new baby, right? They're 2 days old.
Right.
I can only see them supervised in the hospital. When they get released from the hospital, they're going to whoever, because I may not have friends or family who could take them, right? And then I get to see my kid 2 times a week for 2 hours. My newborn.
Wow.
My kid that's 2. My child that really at that age is nonverbal and can't tell me what's going on, and like they're in some stranger's house that I don't know from a can of paint, that I haven't met.
Right.
I don't know anything about them or their living arrangements, but somehow they are more fit than I am.
Right.
Right? And like a thing that I see so often, especially in communities like the Bronx, right? It's a generational thing, right? It's not just you caught an ACS case and that's where it stops. It's often your parent has had an ACS case, your sibling has had an ACS case, your child may catch an ACS case, your grandparent had an ACS case, right? And like that ACS history or that criminal history are things that prevent that person from getting cleared to be able to take your child in your absence, right? So you can say, all right, well, if I can't have my kid, I want them to be with their grandparent. At least that's somebody I trust. I know that
Right.
they're going to make sure my kid is good,
Right.
right? They're going to actually facilitate reunification, right? They're
Right.
on my side. Their goal is for my kid to come back to me. And if they can't,
Right.
I know they're going to hold my kid down, and I know where my child is,
Right.
you know, no matter what, right?
Right.
Somebody in the family is going to be able to get a hold of them.
Right.
But if grandma's got ACS history or grandma got a criminal case, right? And it could be for something stupid like petty theft 20 years ago,
Right.
she's probably not going to be able to take your kid.
Wow.
And so having these generations of folks entrenched in these systems creates a bigger problem of like, now these kids have to be with strangers. They can't be with somebody in their family network, right? They can't be with friends. They can't be with neighbors because the whole community is experiencing this.
Wow. I guess one last, well, I guess a few things. I want to talk briefly about endangering the welfare of a child charge.
Yes.
In particular contexts. I know sometimes the way family court intervenes is because there's this charge that our clients have been charged with in criminal court. And many times what that happens is 2 parents get into a fight and the child is somewhere in the house when the fight happens.
Yeah, a lot of times they don't even see it.
Exactly. Or they even try to say maybe the child was crying.
Yeah.
But because of that, that's enough to get the charge on a criminal court case of endangering the welfare of a child charge. And that's enough to also to trigger ACS involvement. And all the things you just said could happen to them based off of something as minor as that.
Yeah. And just as an aside, what I was talking about earlier, having your house be too dirty,
Yeah.
also could lead to the endangering of the welfare of a child charge.
I
too.
mean, literally anything, right? A traffic accident.
Right.
You didn't strap your kid in right in a car seat. That could be an endangerment charge.
Wow. Okay. I think we have very limited time left. I guess the last thing I will ask you to speak to is, what do you say to people who may think that your role as a family defense attorney or a public defender in a family defense practice is, I guess, counter to the care of a child, or like doesn't prioritize the care of a child, or is adverse to the care of children?
I would say two things. I think that first, folks often think about these cases like we talked about as the situations you hear on the news, right? Like a child was found starving to death, right? They were in a basement with no sunlight. They were beaten like literally within an inch of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, I can't tell you a single case I've encountered that looks like that. It's things like a dirty home, a argument, right? That if these folks lived out in the suburbs and had a house and had that same argument, ACS would not be involved. But because they're in a shelter, right, and there's mandated reporters who work in that shelter, walking past their unit door, hearing an argument and knowing nothing else, they're going to call in a case, right? So, like, think about a lot of these things as really crimes of poverty, right? Crimes of being entrenched in a system. And once you're in one of them, 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up in all of them. The second thing that I would say is it could be you, and it could be you tomorrow. I've had folks who literally have, and not that this should make a difference, right? But like they have college degrees, they have salaried jobs, they live in a nice neighborhood, they're model parents, they are on the PTA, they do all the things, like they bake the cookies, right? Like what you think of as like, you know, quote unquote stellar parenting. And then their kid gets a mysterious injury. They fall at the park, right? They break a clavicle, like something that a 5-year-old boy could do on the monkey bars, and they take their child to the hospital, right? But because they're black or brown, because they maybe don't live on the Upper East Side, right? And they take their child to a city hospital, well, now we're bringing in a child abuse specialist because we think that you're beating the crap out of your kid, and this bruise, right, or this broken clavicle can't be explained by anything else other than child abuse, right? When they actually have a very plausible explanation, the child is saying, yeah, I fell, and they're like, we're not convinced, right? So like, don't be so quick to judge. Don't think that it can't be you. And also really think about the effect that it's having on a kid, right? Like, I know that that's not our job, right? We protect parents, but like removing a child from their parent is a traumatic, life-changing experience. And there are so many statistics and articles in every type of paper, scholarly journal you could think of that talks about how those kids are more likely to end up in the school to prison pipeline. Those kids are more likely to end up arrested, right? They're more likely to end up with their own ACS case and having their children removed. They're more likely to be teenage parents, to have substance use just because they were removed from their parent. And sometimes as little as 24 hours is enough for them to have those statistics.
Wow. Whew. Well, Conrad, as we say on the podcast, none of this is free legal advice. This is just free game. And Janae, you just dropped a whole bunch of game, and we really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
What is some last minute game you want to lead the people with?
I mean, I feel like this gets said on every collateral consequence episode, but like, please think twice before you call the police on somebody.
Think 10 times.
Think 10 times. Like now you've heard enough to really like hopefully see the kinds of things that can happen when you call the police on somebody. But really, when you call the police on somebody, you could be re-traumatizing a child, right? Re-traumatizing the parent, right? And you could be creating scenarios where these two people in the future, again, are still ensnared in cycles of violence, right? And that they themselves are trapped in. And it creates problems for further generations, like we were saying. So just like really just think 10 times before you call the cops on people, especially black and brown people.
Yeah, I guess just to elaborate on that, I would say try other forms of intervention before getting the police involved, whether that's going to your family, going to a friend, going to counseling. Like, I don't advise calling the police, like maybe unless like your life really is being threatened and that's the only intervention like thing we have in place. But otherwise, try other forms of intervention before you get the police involved, especially when there's a kid involved, because
1,000%.
you will have unintended consequences, even if you're the person who you are the victim of the situation.
Right. And if you do end up getting the police called on you and you do end up with ACS in your life, please don't try to defend yourself. Don't share your side of the story, right? I know it's a natural inclination. It's a human thing to do to say, I want to defend myself. But 9 times out of 10, you are not helping yourself.
Right.
Don't say anything.
Right.
Get that ACS worker's contact information and go find a lawyer.
Right. And you might think you're safe because the police not talking to you and it's ACS talking to
But
you.
ACS is the police.
Exactly. That's it. Mic drop. Um, Janae, thank you again.
Thank you for having me, y'all.
I know I gave you some flowers earlier, but I want to give you some flowers again, particularly as a black woman who's working in a profession that we know is dominated by white people. Just for navigating what you've done, for being a supervisor, and just being able to exist in your space despite all the racism, despite all the sexism that you're experiencing. Thank you for still choosing to do this work and still choosing to fight despite all of those experiences. And I hope that you just feel rewarded enough in this work to keep you going as long as you can.
Thank you, y'all, and thank you again for creating this space.
For sure. If no one else sees you, we see you. But yeah, so we've come to the end of another episode of the Brothers in Law podcast. Yeah, we making waves, y'all. Tune in. We have many more topics, many more subjects we like to discuss. And today, hopefully, you are walking away with a little bit more of an understanding of what can happen to you, particularly when it comes to ACS and your family if the police get involved. So yeah, stay tuned and see y'all next time on the Brothers in Law podcast. Peace.
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 Bye.